Welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Stephanie.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being here. I know you're busy, and I appreciate you taking a little time to carve out and come down and visit. So you're at U.S. Bank. Tell me about your role. What's your job these days?
Yeah, my job. I love my job in the standpoint that it changes a lot from what we do. The official title is I'm Senior Vice President. I run the Innovation Design Group within the U.S. Bank Innovation Team. What do we do in innovation design? Well, we've got a lot of beautiful diagrams that I could pull out to show you what kind of right. So we're really good at process and diagramming it, and there are better people to explain it. But at the end of the day, what I really think about is our team is there to inspire others, inspire ourselves in some cases, but really, how do we help people get their idea stated and then move that idea forward into something? Sometimes it's something our very own team is doing that. Sometimes it's a program that we're running, like our Innovator in Residence program, where we're helping employees bring their idea forward. You know, there's a lot of momentum behind being innovative right now in banking. So, you know, having a role like this is, in a way, it's a privilege, but there's also a lot of pressure on it because of how we have to innovate and get employees to think about that. Yeah,
I've found, and I love that you have that kind of Innovator in Residence program, because where I've seen other companies sort of make mistakes is that they'll have sort of this innovation group over here, but don't really realize there's a lot of people trying to innovate all over the company. And if there isn't a good channel between those two areas, if that person who's just trying to innovate, like on what they do with paper clips down here, versus, versus like the new digital whatever. How have you found success, or where have you seen challenges in building that channel between sort of where that innovation group is and the business side of things, right? Because the business in your industry has a lot of regulations. A lot of other ones do too. I mean, how do you build that channel? Like, how have you found success being like, hey, business, bring your ideas here? Yeah. Because
the truth is there's never a lack of ideas and there's never a lack of problems to solve. It's giving people space in order to have the time to think about them. You know, very often it's a rush, like we're in crisis, there's a big problem, let's go fix it now. And everyone just starts running before they start understanding what that problem is or even what the solution could be. Right. So having space for people to be able to just think through, I've had this idea, it's been something that I thought could help my business, and giving them a program of which they can kind of work through those ideas, which is what happens in our Innovator program. That's great, because they normally wouldn't allow themselves that. You know, the employee who is sitting in their cube today and really thinking about their paper clips and how they could use them differently, or using Post-it notes to, you know, map out how they would make a new system. Those are the ones that I really care about, because they actually are working on solving that problem. It's just that they either don't think that they have a voice or a place in the company to say, hey, I want to look at this, because this is something. That's the common problem I see, It is. And it's hard, right? A big company, there's lots of layers of people and humans doing different things. And so it's easy to miss that. And it's also, how do you encourage that? Innovation as a word is a blessing and a curse at the same time, right? Because it's a big word and it feels very heavy. And I come out of, the design side. So, I always think about creativity and being creative in our problems and thinking around how we can come up with different solutions, because there's so many ways to solve a problem, right? And I like to talk to people in that mindset versus the big weight of innovation. However, right, there is a catch to that innovation. Employees get really excited when you talk about innovation with them, because it's like, oh yeah, I want to innovate too. Yeah. Of course, everyone wants to do something different and better than what's happening. Whether they're serving a customer or they have a product and they have the same issue, they don't want it to be that way naturally, right? So giving them a space and sort of helping their managers or maybe even their team understand that this is a space where you're going to come in and you're going to explore and you're going to be very focused on how to kind of go solve that is great, because now you're kind of building an innovation roadway for everyone. Hey, look at this person. They're in this program and they're focused, and it, nobody's died. They seem really happy. We're getting some new things. It kind of starts to build that trust and belief.
It sounds like what you're talking about is really a robust communication strategy, more so than just an innovation strategy, right?
Yeah.
Is that where you've seen like the pluses and minuses? Is it the communication that's really the crux to that?
I think it is. I think communication, and, sometimes I joke that I want to communicate some of our programs and our stuff so much that people hate us. Like, stop telling me about the program.
I've heard it.
Enough.
I know.
You've innovated all over. Stop it.
Yeah, stop it. Posters everywhere.
Right. But honestly, it is the communication. And that is the problem in a large company. I think that is actually a really big challenge for big companies with innovation in general, is that there's a lot of distractions. The day you start talking to somebody about innovation, they could also get the agile message or the lean message, or maybe they're getting process improvement and doing continuous improvement activities. All of these things have a thread that's similar, and you can get either confused by them or just feel like, well, that one's not for me, I'm going to try this one. Yeah. All of which are fine methods, all of which should exist in a company. It's just how to sort of help people understand the spaces to maybe use those, or how maybe your space, which is innovation, might be different for them. And although they might have heard of design thinking in one of those other streams, you might be applying the design thinking differently in your stream, right? Yeah. It's hard. And then the other thing is there's, a natural amount of turnover in a larger company. So you may have gotten everyone message, and then people shift, they move to a different department, all that kind of stuff. So I really do have a dream of having people be like, stop talking about innovation, like that they just get so much of the message, they're done with it, because I don't think we can communicate enough. And, we very frequently are thinking about our own innovation, like, well, how do we get to the employees differently? How do we get to their managers? How do we make it so that this is a norm and you want your employees to go through this program, or it's a way we grow talent at U.S. Bank, is this innovation program. We have lots of discussions ourselves because it's marketing, communication, the promotion. But at the same time, the program itself, in order to kind of really deliver to those messages, it has to have some success. So at the same time as you're trying to promote yourself, you've got to make sure that you've got the right program in place and tools there and all that kind of stuff.
Because you got to share the wins, right?
You do.
Because then people want to get on board with that. One of the problems I've seen in the past is this, and again, it's not specifically to any space or industry, but that there's a culture of done in the executive department, of like, when is this innovation going to be done? When are we done with our digital transformation, or things like that? Yeah. Right. And I mean, how do you, because again, like what you just talked about, that communication strategy, that isn't just like, all right, we made a really nice email that'll go out once a week and update people. Like that's not enough. It's constant change and grooming, right? But how have you found best in managing up around this idea of like, when's it going to be done, Stephanie? Like when can I just be done with this and then move on to my next thing? Yeah. What is the magic answer? Well, the current method, right? Maybe that's today's method. Yeah, today's method. We started to probably about 3 years ago, and it might have actually happened at the same time, if I think about it, started to look at lean startup and bringing that into, and that's actually was part of the founding of the first Innovator in Residence program, is looking at as a model and seeing how we bring that through. But at the same time, we also started to form a fintech strategy and reaching out to fintechs. Instead of being afraid of them and worried about them, let's partner and let's see what we can do, right? In spending time with those fintechs, I think in really just startups in general, their method of done, which is always evolution, right? You're constantly churning and burning and learning, and those cycles that are helping you learn about your product, therefore able to move it forward or in some cases pivot when you need to. Right. That kind of mindset, I feel, is leaking in a really healthy way to some of our stuff. We're able to talk about experiments more and what we're doing this experiment to learn this thing, to prove this other thing, so that we can go in with confidence, right? So that when we declare something done, right, it's done-ish, right? But it's done better than if we just said we just made it quickly for you. Makes sense. So having some of that proof that you can bring them along on the journey and they get more exposure to it is
there are times where you have to be careful because there's a balance of how much sausage making do they get and how much.
Because it can get distracting, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. And too detailed and sometimes blow you apart. So there's a fine balance that I think we're still learning on. But that we're starting to educate the company around that, I think, gives us some freedom or a better way to understand what done is. Because the other challenge is that in traditional product development, you have this commercial release, there's a marketing plan, a communication plan. But with a lot of these newer experiences, it's not just the same old product, right? So declaring something done is dangerous for us, too, because we've seen some things that are really creative, really interesting, and then when they go through the done factory, right, and comes out the other side, you're like, oh my God, right? That's not going to live very long because it has to be care and fed in a very different way or in a way that we're currently not always doing in our commercial process. So, those are things we know and we're working on. We've brought in Agile and I think that kind of spirit is going to help us too. But, looking at how startups have been doing things is probably one of the more refreshing models to be able to refer to because everyone's kind of impressed and in awe about how these people do it. And we've, I've sat in the meetings where everyone's like, they're going to be dead in a week. No way. And here we are 5 years later and they're amazing. Right. So there
if
is
I could
that.
predict the future, that'd be great.
Right. I know.
I'm also trying to imagine a done factory in my head. It just seems really a sad, like a lot of black smoke spewing out of there. A lot of stamping and stuff.
It's a dark place.
But I love that perspective because I do think it's about a mindset. I do think it's about communication, but it's always funny to me about how people forget kind of their own roots, right? Like a lot of the larger organizations out there were startups at one point. Sure, they didn't call it that 50, 80, 150 years ago, but at some point they were scrappy and they lost it. I was listening to somebody recently who said if Hilton had in their innovation lab created Airbnb, they wouldn't have known what to do with it.
Right.
Right. But how do you get around that sort of thinking when you're in a larger company and you're really trying to make this impact? I mean, there must always be some sort of fear in the background that's like, what is it going to take to get it over the edge? And that seems like almost to me less skill and more emotional labor in some cases, right? You got to really believe in the solution. Yeah.
That's always where I say, well, that's the art, right? That's not the science because there isn't, the done factory is one scenario, but there isn't a one size fits all kind of approach on that because it depends on the business line and the customer and the needs of the customer. Or if it's a new space, what is that space going to look like? Because, this is another place where we really haven't been as large corporations in these places where we never knew would exist, right? And technologies that do things we never imagined. How do you bring yourself there and your company and your customers in ways that could be very, very different? I think we have that legacy where we're these solid pillars of strength, and I think most large companies are. It's right. They're surviving. Yeah. But this evolution of change, you can't just pivot. It's a big ship. So how do you define parts of you that might act different, look different, be different for those types of scenarios? And, I think that's where that exploration and the testing and learning cycles come in, because you sort of like, look, we did this thing and people were okay with it. And, we're not in the newspaper, right?
Right. Yeah.
Nothing bad happened. Right. We still have that trust, that integrity, but we're incrementally trying to get there, Could we take more risks? I bet we could. And we do see it, and there are times where we'll make a leap, but I kind of feel that this testing and learning and sort of showing the proof along the way is also really helpful because it brings your organization along in a way that they feel comfortable with because you're not betting everything on one thing. Yeah. You're taking a piece and you're exploring it and you're kind of defining it and then sort of learning around it, and then you come back with that and then decisions kind of get made. That seems to work really well. Dominic Venturo, who established our innovation team, I think that was one of the things he did really well early on is he gained trust by, we're just going to pilot and we're going to learn around that, but we're not going to change the entire program overnight. And I think he's trained the company on that kind of thinking too, which is fantastic because now that we have more of this experimentation and learning, we can just keep building off of that knowledge that we've we've had.
So Foundry, for example, we work with a lot of large organizations, and you really have to balance all the things that got them here, that those things have value and they are valuable,
right?
But it's not necessarily what's going to get them there. You know, how have you seen people do it right? Like where, you know, even, I don't care if it's a pitch or if it's whatever, like where you can really, like, how have you found success in balancing that, having value with the things that have been created versus where you want to go next? I mean, it sounds so much like an impossible task sometimes, because you're like, I'm trying to change this, but I have to make you start thinking differently, you know? Yeah,
I think proof, right? If people can feel something, if they can experience, if they can hear like the clip of a customer experiencing that new thing and being really excited about it, if you can show them that you went out and you did some sort of level of testing and you got all this feedback, we really try to put it so that they can see it's not just our opinion over theirs. It's not just this consultant's opinion over theirs, that we really, at the end of the day, care about our customers, because they're going to be about our company, right? They're going to drive it forward for us. And if the customers have good comments, even when they have bad comments, honestly, right? Just so that they can see that we're interacting and that we're doing those things that matter to them, and we're bringing, you know, the new ideas out in a way that allows us to get the feedback that, you know, for example, back in the day, we all used to sit behind glass, right, and spend a lot of time hearing people ruminate about weird questions on products and services, and like, okay, that's it. And then quite often we're wrong, right? Because the difference is when I ask you, how will you use it, and then you actually use it, right? Those could be two different answers in the end. You know, so I think sometimes the proof along the way and the learning. I think the other thing is that we've started to show them examples of, you know, some of the startups or maybe our competitors are using messages like this, which really relate to products like this. And honestly, they're not that different than our products. So maybe we could start to tell our stories differently and think about how we shape those for our customers. Because to your point, we all started at some point in time. Some of those foundations that we've started on are different now, but people still have the same needs, right? I still need to, you know, maybe get a mortgage if I want a house, or a car loan if I want to get a car. You know, there's still stuff that's standard. It's just we've kind of made it hard to get to in some cases. So what are the ways that we can look more from the customer standpoint, which we're doing, and get to how do we serve them in a better and a different way? Yeah, I think that's really key. I used to say this at an old job of mine, is like, if I could make the customer want it, I could change this company overnight. Because not because I was the voice of the customer necessarily, but if I could be like, hey, if you said this to my 3 bosses, like we could totally make that happen for you. They just gotta know that you actually want it, and not that I'm saying that you want it, right? Right. I think that's become so important in today's world, is that's why I think the product culture is so powerful, because you have this product manager and someone who is kind of the voice of the customer, the conduit of the voice of the customer. And that can help you change and modify it, like more, not even quickly, just more feeling safer doing it, right? Yeah. That, the customers have created a landing spot for this out there. There is. I can't see it right now, but they've told me it is. Yep. Right. Speaking of that, let's say I'm listening to this show, Stephanie, and I'm interested in innovation, and I like the idea of being an innovator and these types of things, but my company doesn't necessarily have like a standardized practice or something. Where should I start? Like, where should I start to maybe not come in and be like, here's the new innovation playbook, and, you know, put down a 80-volume tome on their desk. But where would you suggest if I was in a, you know, large company and they didn't really have something standardized? Like, what would you suggest? Yeah, because there's a million things to read, and they'll all contradict each other. They will, or they'll be more theoretical, right? Or they'll tell me just to have more meetings. You know, I always like to kind of start at the basics, and this is because, you know, I like the idea of how you can use design to solve problems, right? And in order to really know if you've got the right solution when you're designing for a problem, is really understanding the problem and the needs of the problem. And so, you know, I think it's always great. What is the problem? Am I the only one experiencing this problem, right? You know, poke your head up from your cube or walk over to a neighbor and just say, hey, I've been looking at this problem. Like, do do you have this problem? Do you know anyone who might have this problem? Really poke around that problem. Hit Google. Google's always good. They have lots of problems in their system. See if you can find others with this problem, because you want to, I think, I always say love the problem, right? Because, we can come up with solutions all day long, and sometimes the solution we love isn't the one the customer does anyway. So if you focus on the problem, I think that's a good place to start. And I think everyone has empathy, mostly, towards this idea of, hey, I've spotted this problem. And I did some research, 5 out of people that I've talked to, or I did a little survey of my peers, or maybe I posted a survey somewhere and I learned more about this problem. The more that you can learn about it and be able to articulate the problem, what you think it is, why you think it's important to look at, and how you might go to sort of investigate it further, that's usually a good way to begin. There's lots of methods and techniques in there, but I feel like at the end of the day, the people who just come out with these winning ideas and really, the things that we all use that we're amazed by in our life, I think really started with somebody understanding this is a problem. There's friction here. I hate the friction. I'm going to go solve for this. But they didn't worry about what method they used necessarily.
Right.
They worried about the best way they could get to the truth of how to solve that problem. I
usually coach people too, just like you're saying, like start to build a coalition around that problem, right? If you have more people than just in your department that have that problem, or maybe they glance off of that problem at some point, you can really start to build a case to say, can we try to find ways to do this, right? Because, businesses are built, they have a good model, right? They're structured, and the goal of it is to like extend and expand that model and make it work even more and make it even more efficient and find more ways. But then you run into things where all of a sudden innovation isn't happening. It's like people are opening accounts for people without them telling them, and it becomes like you know what I mean? It becomes stuff, that becomes innovation, right? It's those types of things. Like if you're going around and talking to more people about, are you having this problem? Are you having this problem? And then talking to the customers, I think you're covering your bases, not to go down some road of like, I don't want to say, but like misguiding folks, right? To be like, no, look over here. This is where you want to pay attention to, and you start to go down a really bad road, right? Versus if you're talking to a lot of people, and not just within your group, right? Because like, especially like a larger organization, you've got a lot of different departments. And so the more you're bringing those people in, even though it's like, well, sales is always the enemy, right? Like they're always selling stuff we don't have and blah, 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 right? I like to pick on my sales friends. But if you don't have them involved in helping create that solution, once it hits their leader's desk, for example, they're going to be like, I don't like this. I don't see, there's not a whiff of my team in this, and it doesn't look like they've been talked to. Right. And so I'm going to block it now. Yeah. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Right. Yeah. No. And that's why, sometimes, I love my job. I love the word innovation as part of my job, but there are times where I wish we could get rid of innovation because we put so much pressure on it. And early on in my career at US Bank, I did work in user experience, and I had the opportunity to design a product, kind of redo a product actually. And I partnered very closely with the head of their sales and product organization. And that's the first thing you learn is that the salespeople are all annoyed as hell. You've made this product. It's crap. I can't sell it. The customer hates it. And, I look at Wells every day and they have a better product. Right. And I'm like, no, stop saying that. but meanwhile at Wells, they're like, look at US Bank product. It's better than right. Yeah. Right. That's exactly what they say, Kurt. And so it's that, again, it's your advisory panel or your user panel around a problem. No one perspective, right, is around a problem. And that's sort of even as you test out your core user base or as you truly identify who the true solution needs to be for. In any company, in any situation, there are multiple people who are influenced by that solution, right? So getting people involved early on, I think, is good too, because in some cases you can bring them along that journey and bring them in
as an advocate, and they'll be there as their team.
Yeah.
But they're also going to be the ones that, make it all fall apart if they don't like it.
Right.
Even if it's a great product, right? They can also, kind of kill it in the deal. So bringing in different groups like that, I think, are important. I also think it's important to remember when we start out is that, and we battle this. I don't have an answer. I wish I did, because I think I could be a bazillionaire. So if anyone has an idea out there, please let me know.
Okay.
Is this idea that innovation is, like the iPhone or an iPad. It's this big, beautiful, gorgeous, it's like technology driven, is whatever. But if you're in a call center and every day you're using a Post-it note to do some manual process, and then you have to take that Post-it note and hand it to somebody else, let's say it's a scenario like that, and I find a solution based on that, and it takes 15 minutes off your day, that's innovation to you. Mm-hmm. Now, to the rest of us, we just automated something, and we might say, well, that's just a new tool we implemented. Maybe that's not innovation. We didn't invent anything new. But to that person, it feels like it's innovation because it really solved a problem for them. And I kind of feel like in some cases, if we look at it that we're solving those little bugs, the things that drive you kind of nuts.
Splash.
Yeah, that it's easier for somebody when you ask them, you got any big ideas out there? That employees can, if they get the thing that they stubbed their toe on out of the way, that in some cases they can get to those bigger ideas. Or maybe the thing that, they're stubbing their toe on can give somebody else like how to loop together 3 ideas to make the big idea. But sometimes I think we do focus, and it is important, right? If you have an innovation program, it has to measure, there has to be some outputs that are, of a certain type. But I also think that incremental, or that Horizon 1 space, is still important in a company because, one, it gets some wins in, gets people feeling good, it gets them confident. Hey, we can change things can get better, but you also have to have the patience and think about the next steps then after you have some of those wins. And I think that's the balance, because you don't want to be all in Horizon 1 just fixing bugs that other people maybe should be fixing. But sometimes I also feel like there's that balance. And again, the percentage, I don't know, but the balance of some of those smaller wins helping you get to the bigger wins.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective, because I've heard people can kind of condemn the idea of an innovation lab in a place, because innovation should be taking place all across the business, right? And I think it goes exactly what you're saying. It isn't like, sure, there can be a central location where ideas land, but if you can be making impacts throughout the business, even in the smallest of ways, I think that's how you're going to build that trust. And people are then going to be like, oh, that's the place I go for any problem, not just when I have a new iPhone idea, right?
Yeah. Because eventually people grow the skill around it. It's like building up a muscle, right? Now I'm getting like experience with this, and I'm getting some acknowledgement of it. And so I want to keep doing it. I'm going to look bigger and I'm going to look broader next time. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like in some cases you start with the trust, like, well, I'm going to give you my idea here, and are you going to really help me solve it or not? And those wins also help get that trust so that people then go to, to do it on their own. Sometimes I feel like in particularly large companies that are highly regulated too, we've really taught people process to keep products safe and secure and all that stuff, and we don't.
Yeah, you got to manage a lot of risk,
right? But I also think that in some cases along the way we sort of said stop being creative, and that's where I sort of battle with innovation, because some days I just like give them all color crayons, like let's just color for an hour, something where it just breaks them out of that feeling like I don't need to think because I'm following this process and my process will take care of the thing that I'm doing. Giving them that space that it's okay to sort of think outside the box and take a few risks, because on paper or on a prototype, it's very low risk, and it's okay to have the risky idea as long as we're testing and sort of mitigating that risk along the way. I'd like to do more of that practice, which is why I love design thinking, right? You get people in and, you got the pipe cleaners and the paper and the tape out on the table, and they look at you like, okay, this is going to be a weirdo workshop, right? And by the end, they've made things, they're empowered, they're happy, they're inspired, and you can just feel their energy is kind of refreshed around work. And I think the bank, like every other company too, is getting more spaces for people to be creative and collaborate together. And I love that, because you alone in your little box, staring at your screen on a conference call all day, it doesn't necessarily scream creative, right? So having those opportunities, I think, is the other part of it. Yeah. You need it. That's kind of how to get the culture of innovation, right? Everyone says, what's the culture of innovation? I'm like, stop it. Create spaces for people to play and investigate and feel good about talking and just having that time without feeling like they should be doing something else that might be more critical. We have to kind of build that in.
Well, because organizational change is hard.
Yes.
And it starts with that culture and mindset. And like you said, I mean, if the organization sees that, or if the culture sees that the organization is actually paying attention, like from a physical space and all that stuff, like I think it just constantly keeps that encouragement going, right? But what I like about you, Stephanie, and your perspective, what I've always appreciated is you're not a zealot, is that there isn't one tool that fixes the problem for you. You're willing to try all of them and none of them and make up your own stuff, right? But when I was much younger, like I thought, well, this is the process. This is how we solve all these problems. I think there's value in all of these things, but how have you found success in choosing the right sort of framework, approach, whatever you want to call it, when you're facing an innovation sort of effort or a problem has been presented? How have you found the best way to sort of choose, like, okay, do I take a lean startup? Do I do a design sprint? Do we just like do a survey? Like, is it just based on experience, or have you found sort of a formula that works for you?
So one thing is that it's a community, right? So there's always others on the team that have different ideas on how to do things. And so I look at these processes or these techniques are all things in our toolkit. Yep. And it's just like, cooking even, right? So when you go to cook something, you use something different for cooking eggs than you might cooking a steak. Mm-hmm. And I kind of look at it like that. So what am I trying to get to? And there are times where like, I really have to get an answer within the next 30 minutes or in the next 3 days. Mm-hmm. So that sometimes also alters my choices. There are people out there, like I follow IDEO's blog. I'm a big IDEO fan.
Oh, and me too.
I hate them, right? Because they're so perfect at like having an elegant answer to this, because, they're consultants who get paid for which technique they're going to be using that day. And I bless them for it, because they've taught me a lot. But at the same time, I hate them for being perfect, because I always think like, they're like, beautifully elegant when they go to do a solution. And I come out with like, well, I got a marker, I got a pen, and that guy back there. Let's go. Yeah. Right. It's never as beautiful. There's no birds singing or a creek in the background.
Right. Birds dressing you. And like, I know that
it's
feeling.
Good. And, sometimes too, right? You have to be willing to learn and admit we used the wrong thing. And that is something that is sometimes harder, because I don't want to create an environment or get people to think, well, you did the wrong thing. So one, you didn't know what you're doing, or two, you don't have the right methods. And the truth is that sometimes you think you've got the right thing going and you get there and it just blows to hell. Yeah. So you got to celebrate that learning too. And like, okay, next time I'm making eggs, I'm not using a fork, right? Like I'm going to do something else.
That makes sense. Cause I mean, I've learned in my career, like in order to successfully learn from failure, as it were, or to coach others too, is like just break the work into smaller pieces, so it's not such a huge explosion when it does fail, right? Just keep breaking it down in smaller and smaller and smaller and tinier pieces. Right. What I've seen is, where people will be like, well, we could do a design sprint, or we could come up with a 6-month project plan to build a prototype, and when we're done, oh crap, like how much money and time have we wasted of people? But that's our typical process. That's what we do with any other thing, right? So it's hard to tell those folks, like, no, we're going to do it differently. We're going to do it in 5 days and not in 6 months. Mm-hmm. A similar sort of thing, and getting people to like wrap their head around that. Right.
Yeah, because I always have the question, and people who've worked with me are probably going to laugh when they hear this, is like, what's the right amount of research? What's the right amount of testing and learning? Because in some cases you can research forever. Yep. You can test something way too much, and you don't really get farther. And so what is the balance? I think that recently, probably like the last 2 years, right? We're getting better at the idea of time boxes, So started with Google Sprints, right? And sprint methodology gets you thinking about making decisions, right? And just having a decider and just going on with it and everyone committing. And, at first it's like, well, what the hell? I have 5 more questions. Like, somebody answer my questions right now, right? Yep. And no, like, keep moving and letting go of some of that and trusting the process. For somebody, like, I should have been all over that. At first, it was nearly traumatic for me. But I think having those types of things, like I'm very curious, so I'm willing to go out and learn and try different things because I don't think there is one way. And you kind of take bits and pieces for your toolkit from all of these things. But sometimes you land on something. Like I'm a big fan of sprints now. It was quite traumatic first time, but I'm over it. I'm in. Because you have to be disciplined. And, when you have a lot of really good creative minds, you can fall down a cliff pretty quickly. Right. Or product people, they start building right away, and all of that's good. That's good. But the discipline of holding yourself accountable to make decisions by certain points and just go with what you know at that time, we've got to get better at trusting. And I think some of those methods that we've been trying recently are really helping with that. So it gives you more confidence because you get some wins out of those, and then you say, okay, the next one, do we really need 6 months? I bet we could do this in 3 months,
right. Doing stuff feels good. It feels like forward momentum.
Yes.
Right? I see so many folks either with some sort of, digital center of excellence, innovation sort of title things that get caught up in, like, we got to make stuff because that's forward momentum. And there's so many times where it's hard to be like, why are you making stuff? And they're like, because new stuff needs to be made. And it's like this circular conversation that'll go. For me, it's really been about trying to focus on that why. Like, why are we even, what is the purpose of this? What's the vision for it? You have to balance that too, because and again, not to beat up on large organizations, but a lot of times it's like, we're not going to move forward this till I see a 5-year ROI plan or a 3-year ROI plan on this thing. And it's like, okay, well, this other company didn't have that, and now they've taken 10% of our business in the last 3 years. So, right. But I get why. I understand why. Yeah. I mean, Target made that change years ago, right? Where they flipped everything on their head and they're like, no more innovation unless I see a return in 3 years. Then we'll innovate. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, they've been innovating. It isn't that things have gotten stagnated. They've innovated on things. But again, it's like, it's this pendulum that I see swing, right? And so where do you see kind of the next few years going? Not necessarily, I mean, maybe in your industry, but just in terms of the way we're solving problems these days, the way we're finding these problems. Yeah.
Going back to my done factory concept is that is our mistake. The person who wants that 5 years is just going to map that out over those 5 years and is like, okay, here's year 1, check, year 2, check. That's not how the ecosystem is for humans anymore, right? We can try it, but I bet we're not going to be as successful because it's not just a one and done kind of experience. People look at the things because we're always on our phones or, interacting with some sort of technology. They look at things as kind of continuous now. And I think that we, especially in banking, you can be a utility pretty quickly, but as we roll out a service and we think about something, it can't just be it's launched in February, the marketing plan goes out the end of February, and then we just kind of continue to grow the product from there, and 3 months from there is another marketing plan. There's this learning as the product's being used and getting that constant feedback so that actually becomes part of the marketing. So it's like this evolution as somebody's using it, and it should feel more living and less static and less done. Because if you think about the products you really probably like and enjoy in your life, they feel alive to you, right? Yep. They have some sort of feedback back to you, and so you're getting into it. Yeah, banking sometimes is less fun than what we want it to be, let's face it, but there are other parts of your financial life that, we could grow, we could think about. It doesn't just have to be your checking account friendship, right? I'm your friend in your savings account, visit me once a year. No, it's like, what other parts of the conversation can we have? What could we look at as an extension of this product? Well, the only way we're going to be able to answer those questions best is if we're following the customer through that and we're learning walking with them along the life cycle, and we're thinking about those moments of truth or difference or, even pain points we might be causing, and how are we quickly solving and evolving that so it feels like we're fresh and we're responding to them instead of just, so often, I hate this because it hasn't changed over, I think I've been there 15 years now in banking. It's like, I don't know, I opened a checking account when I was in college and I haven't touched it since. Or my mom got me a savings account when I was 12 and this person's 40. Like, oh God, these really shouldn't be sleeper products when you think about, how much you're transacting with your money on a daily basis, right? Go to Starbucks, you're spending some money.
Yep.
That's just kind of how it is. So I would like us, and I'm hoping, and I feel positive about some of these things that are coming as far as, even just agile thinking around marketing and communications. And we've got lots of customer journey teams, which are awesome at US Bank now. And I like this idea that we are focused on that learning and getting the feedback loops, because I think we're going to be able to evolve our products in a different way. It's probably the same product. It's a checking account, but it might have different things based on that evolution. And so that's my hope, is that we look less of it's just this campaign that goes out once, right? And it's more like this engagement study that follows the ecosystem somebody lives in so that we can kind of be more responsive to it.
So I know you're constantly growing your team and looking for more folks. I definitely suggest people check out the U.S. Bank careers side, and especially on the design side, because you guys are always looking for people.
We are.
But if I want to know more about Stephanie, if I want to learn more about what she's up to and what she's got going on, where's a good place to reach out and say hello?
Yeah, I know.
Where are you most active these days?
I am not on Facebook. I do have a family Facebook page for my kids so we can get Science Museum updates. That's kind of our big thing. I think it's really LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, but I am more of a social media stalker. I like to learn. And so I'm always reading. So if you've got interesting things and you want to find me out there, I'm there. I would love to hear and see what you're reading. If you've got something you want to talk about, I would love to engage. I just, LinkedIn probably is my most active because, it seems to be the people who I engage with and I'm learning with are spending a lot of time out there as well.
Yeah. That's good. Well, Stephanie, I want to thank you for taking the time today. I always enjoy our conversation, so I'm glad we finally got to record one.
Right.
It's great.
It is.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Schmidt List. If you want to learn more about how Foundry accelerates innovation, check out foundrymakes.com. And if you'd like me to speak about establishing a growth mindset at your conference or with your team, drop me a note at kurt@foundrymakes.com. Oh, and the next time you're on the internet, head to iTunes and leave the show a review. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and I hope you have a fantastic week.